And it's fine to keep your cameras on, but please keep yourselves muted for the duration of the talk. And then if you have questions for our speaker, just put them in the chat and I'll keep track of them. And then after the talk is over, I will call on you one by one and invite you to unmute yourself and ask your question. And if you can't unmute yourself or it's not practical for you, just let me know in the chat and I can read your question for you. So I would like to introduce tonight's speaker, who I'm really, really happy that we have with us. Dr. Wojciech Tworek is assistant professor in the Taube Department of Jewish Studies at the University of Wrocław. And his work focuses on Hasidism and Jewish orthodoxy, particularly the Chabad movement. His first book, called Eternity Now, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi and Temporality, was published in 2019. And it explores the nexus of theology and praxis in the teachings of the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement. And his second book, which is an annotated translation of Nosson Sternhardt's Yemei Moronat, is scheduled for publication in the coming months. And he's working on a project called Mysticism and Modernity, funded by the National Science Center in Poland, which examines the cultural and social history of the Chabad movement in interwar Poland. And I'd like to add that, like several other speakers in this series, Wojciech has a close connection to Ada Rappaport Albert, whose memory the seminar series is dedicated to, as he was one of her last PhD students. So I am delighted to hand over to Wojciech.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming and thank you for having me here. Thank you, Lily, and your group for inviting me to have this talk. It's truly my pleasure to be back in London, even though only on Zoom. But still, I really enjoy to see all of you here, to see my teachers, my friends, my colleagues, not only from London, from all over the world, actually. And also to see so many new faces. As Lily mentioned, this series is dedicated to the memory of Professor Ada Rappaport Albert. And indeed, I was one of Ada's doctoral students. And I can't emphasize enough her impact on my own academic path and my academic interests. And it's truly my honor and my pleasure to present at an event that celebrates her and her memory. As probably many of you know, both Hasidism and theater were Ada's passions, and I really hope she would enjoy a conversation about a mixture of these two topics. So let me try to share my screen with you, and we'll take it from there. Okay, I hope you can, or you will see it in a second. So let me begin with a short disclaimer that will also serve as a statement of purpose. I'm neither a theater scholar nor I'm a Yiddish literature or Yiddish scholar. As Lily said, in my research, I focused on cultural and social history of Hasidism. But at the same time, I'm passionate about both Hasidism and Yiddish. And while studying Hasidism and Yiddish in academic frameworks, I was sort of surprised to see so many blind spots in the research. And these blind spots have been created by both scholars of Hasidism and scholars of Yiddish. So scholars of Hasidism generally have tended to look at Hasidism through the lives and works of the tzaddikim, or the leaders of Hasidic groups. This has changed in the recent years, but still, if you go to any major Jewish studies conference and you ask people what Hasidic culture is, most of people would probably tell you that, you know, it's the mystical writings of the tzaddikim, or perhaps it's one of the emblematic rituals like the high table or the tzaddik stish. And if you push them and you ask about popular Hasidic culture, then most of the answers that you'd probably hear would be about the nigunim or the Hasidic melodies, or perhaps stories, like the Hasidic stories from the late 19th or the early 20th centuries. And similar problem and similar biases you can find in Yiddish studies. So there's a tremendous research in Yiddish literature and in Yiddish theater, but it generally stops at the entrance to any of the Hasidic neighborhood. And meanwhile, there is literature, there's press, there's music, and there's also theater that's, like as we speak, that's produced in Yiddish by Hasidim. And I believe that investigation into any of these phenomena would benefit tremendously the way we understand contemporary Hasidism and in particular the contemporary Hasidic popular culture. But also it would help us understand better the trajectories of the development of post-war Yiddish culture in general. So again, while I may not be the best equipped to tackle the issue of the Hasidic theater, or in broader terms, the issue of the Hasidic popular culture, and this talk is basically a side project of mine only. I hope that at least I will succeed I will succeed in introducing this topic to you in the broadest strokes possible, and perhaps one of you will take over, and maybe it will inspire one of you to investigate it thoroughly and to write a full-length study about this issue. So for the starters, I think we should acknowledge that the choice of a theatrical play as a medium for Hasidic entertainment is by far not an obvious one. Hasidim tend to see theater and many other types of modern entertainment with a suspicious eye. Already the Talmudic sages consider the theater to be a foreign entertainment which Jews generally should avoid, mostly because of the idolatrous character of the theater. And later on, moreover, in the 19th century, the modern theater was adopted by the Maskilim, by the proponent of Haskalah, of the Jewish Enlightenment, and was used by them in their struggle against what they perceived to be Hasidic obscurantism. And this obviously only contributed to the perception of theater by Hasidim and by emergent orthodoxy as transgressive and often as eponymy of assimilation. And this trend continued in the post-Holocaust Haredi or ultra-Orthodox communities. And even though some rabbis have duly noted that modern theater, unlike the theater in the ancient times, is no longer idolatrous, they nevertheless have kept the prohibition valid, supporting it as well with the ban on following Chukat Goyim, or the non-Jewish ordinances. And perhaps one of the consequences of this traditional aversion towards theater can explain why contemporary Hasidic artists that I'm going to talk about today never use this term. So they never, as far as I know, they never talk about their art as theater. And instead, they use the Yiddish term shpiln, or its Yiddishized English translation, pleyz. But despite this halachic aversion towards theater, there have always been forms of traditional halachically sanctioned theatrical performances. The most known are various forms of the Purim shpil, or a biblical themed performance staged around the festival of Purim. These performances have been continued in the post-Holocaust Haredi communities, and as Shifra Epstein has showed in her research, these new plays, these post-war plays, written often in DP camps or already in the US or in Israel, began weaving the tragic experiences of the Holocaust survivors into traditional themes. Other forms of performances have also thrived within the Haredi communities. Since entertaining the newlywed is considered special merit, it's customary to employ a batchen, or a wedding jester. Perhaps the most influential batchen of the post-war Hasidic community was a Karlin Stolin Hasid Yontev Erlich. His Yiddish songs and spoken word span from Hasidic stories to stinging criticism of American consumerist culture. And although himself a performer, Erlich was very critical of theater and of new threats on the Jewish streets, that is movies and television. So you can look, for example, you can listen to, for example, to his song called Sore Ba'ohel, or Sarah in the Tent, which presents the ideal of a pious woman who, besides speaking quietly and avoiding passing between men in the street, notices, and I quote, theaters and cinemas full of filth. Why they're full of filth? Because these places are the loci of the desecration of the divine name. Nonetheless, I think the influence of Erlich's songs and spoken word on the development of the performing arts in the Hasidic communities should not be underestimated. Many Hasidic badchens, singers, storytellers, and theater artists who proliferated in recent years are, I believe, in a way, spiritual children or grandchildren of Yontev Erlich. So storytelling is one thing. And indeed, audio plays presenting edifying stories for children became an important branch of Hasidic Yiddish creativity. These audio plays circulated on cassettes and later CDs, with their dramatization, with the use of both adult and child actors, prepared the ground for the theatrical plays in Yiddish. And when the new possibilities arose, some of the authors and some of the producers of these audio tapes became involved in the staging and distribution of Hasidic theater in Yiddish. So that's one thing. Another thing is the Hasidic song, especially the way it is performed today. So with the rise of the internet, and despite continuous attempts of the Haredi establishment to limit its influence, the Haredi artists found a new venue for their creativity. Professional songs accompanied now by video clips in which the story is often as important as the song, have replaced old amateurish tapes, old amateurish tape recordings. The Hasidic video clip, which is a great topic for a separate conversation, they have developed from low-budget, tongue-in-cheek videos to professional short films produced by tech-savvy artists who have at disposal much bigger resources and look at the subjects with much less self-consciousness. And here you can take as an example Mendel Roth's song and his video called Minche from 2016. This song is based on a Hasidic tale, and the producers advertise it on their YouTube profile as, and I quote, an amazing reconstruction of life from 300 years ago, filmed in Ukraine in an impressive and inspirational cinematic production, which again is another topic I can talk later on, or another topic for a different conversation about the way of remembering and reconstructing the pre-war or pre-Holocaust world of the Eastern European shtetl in contemporary Hasidic culture. And finally, after Purim spiels and songs and audio tapes, the last thing that I want to mention is the recent rise of the Haredi cinema. Despite the negative view of cinema and television, a fledgling Haredi film industry took shape at the beginning of the 21st century. Films are generally divided into male and female, which determines the audience, the cast, and often genre and the channels of distribution. And while the majority of the Haredi cinema is produced either in Hebrew or in English, there are at least a few examples of Yiddish films as well. And the 2006 American film A Geschäft is probably the most prominent example of a Haredi Yiddish film. So I have started from this lengthy introduction showing you tapes and films and YouTube videos in order to demonstrate that the Hasidic Yiddish theatrical performances did not emerge in vacuum. The shpiln are a product of a long-term developments in Haredi popular culture and are part and parcel of the growing Haredi and Hasidic presence in the new media. And these in turn testify to the high level of acculturation of both Israeli and American Hasidic Jews. The growing demand for kosher entertainment reflects the internalization, even if only limited, of the codes of leisure culture by the Haredi community. The Hasidic plays respond to this demand in ways that do not threaten the value of Torah study. These plays that I'm going to talk about today are addressed predominantly to Hasidic boys, and they are performed only at some points of the year, namely in the intermediary days of Sukkot and Passover, and during the 8th days of Hanukkah. In other words, they are staged when yeshivas have a study break, and so attending such events does not interfere with the study of the intended audience. The plays combine the performing aspect of cinema with the much cheaper know-how of audio plays, and the fact that these plays can now be distributed on DVDs and through developing stream-on-demand services also contribute to their financial feasibility. So in sum, the growing demand for Haredi entertainment combined with the new channels of distribution that provided the Hasidic theater artists with new sources of income have significantly contributed to the blooming and professionalization of Hasidic Yiddish theater plays. Similarly to Haredi films, the plays are always gender segregated. That is to say, men and women never appear together on stage. The cast is amateur or half amateur, and the plays proudly advertise themselves as, I quote, performed by Hamish youth. Now, Hamish is a Yiddish word that can be roughly translated as homey or cozy or domestic, but in Hasidic parlance, it refers to something that, or someone or something that belongs to the Hasidic community. So, but still, some of those Hamish actors have gained some notoriety in the community. Like, for example, couple Elboygen or Ari Abramovich, and Ari Abramovich is the gentleman on the left-hand side of the photo. And in rare cases, the reputation of some of these actors also reached beyond the community. And that is the case of Moshe Mordechai Leffler, who's better known by his stage pseudonym as Menashe Lustig, whom I'm sure many of you know from his role in the 2017 Yiddish feature film Menashe, in which Menashe Lustig played the main protagonist. Today, several groups produce this shpiln, or this plays. The most popular, as far as I can tell, are Chazak production by Zushe Schmelzer, who is the older brother of the famous singer Lippe, and who is also an example of an artist who, in a way, graduated from audio plays to theater. And two other leading companies are Neuhaus Production, run by a Satmar Chassid Laser Neuhaus, and the Epic Spiels run by Chaim Itzkovich. These two companies have produced two popular series: Intern, basically like Behind, and Unglaublich, or Unbelievable. But between these and other troops, dozens of plays have been performed and distributed throughout the Hasidic community. Now, just as the audio plays and the films, also the Yiddish staged plays are edifying stories intended to convey Hasidic values to children. They teach them an idealized version of Jewish history with the focus on the constant divine providence that watches over the pious protagonists. Interestingly, while selected Haredi films and songs may contain, or you can find a kernel of social criticism, as far as I can tell, the Yiddish plays have been so far consistently conservative, and they refrained from doing that. This reluctance towards criticism, towards internal criticism, can be understood. Hasidic theater troupes invest considerable money into putting together these shows that are staged, that run for a couple of days only, and later on they are distributed through Hasidic stores or Hasidic internet businesses. And so they may be very wary of crossing the line and causing a scandal that would leave them playing to an empty audience, to an empty auditorium, and then having all these bills to pay. If you look at these plays that are available now, some of them tell stories from the Bible, some of them tell stories from the Talmud, other describe hagiographic stories about, other contain hagiographic stories about famous rabbis or tzaddikim. Still other depict the devotion and perseverance of Jews during the Inquisition, the Soviet times, or the Holocaust. And as I mentioned earlier, these dramas are staged basically 3 times a year, including Chol HaMoed Pesach, including the intermediary days of Passover. And as most of you probably know, the sages famously said that every Jewish person in every generation should see themselves as if they personally left Egypt. And watching and reliving stories of salvation from enslavement in the Nazi concentration camps or in the Gulag serves exactly this purpose by showing the audience that the story of the Haggadah indeed repeats itself in every generation. Other shpiln, however, may concern very different topics. So you can have shpiln about the Italian mafia in Manchester or the Zionist government in the land of Israel. But be that as it may, they all share one unifying message. And that is that one must always have faith and one must always have confidence in the Almighty, for he brings salvation in the most mysterious ways. Sometimes the help comes from a Chabad Sheliach and his intercession with American senators or the CIA, as you can see in Sabotazh, for example. Sometimes a couple hearing a song from a child who lost his father repents and saves his fellow Jews from certain death in the concentration camp, as you can see in a fintstere nakht in Varshe. Always, as King Solomon put it in the Proverbs, benevolent deeds save from the death. Take Fievel, for example, a main protagonist of Misterye, a mystery, who pays a courteous visit in a hospital to a non-Jewish person, completely unaware of the fact that this non-Jewish person in the hospital is the boss of the Italian mafia. And later, thanks to this simple mitzvah, thanks to this simple deed, this grateful mafioso forgives all Fievel's debts and essentially saves his life. The plays, which durations span from 2 to 4 or 5 hours, divided into several acts, often with change in scenography, and what's interesting, with increasingly elaborated props. Most of these plays are advertised as hochspannendike Meises, that is, most suspenseful stories. And indeed, as you could hear already, the plot usually includes many intrigues and may involve CIA, KGB, the police, the Mossad, basically anything that helps to keep the audience on their toes. The story is usually punctuated with songs performed by performed on stage by the actors. And also, even plays dealing with the most earnest issues, such as the Holocaust, for example, even those plays contain humorous elements that, that are intended to crack an occasional laugh. Sometimes it may be at a joke from the old home, from the Alterheim in Eastern Europe, sometimes at the cheeky resourcefulness of the main protagonists, sometimes at the expense of the negative characters, that could be secular Jews or Zionists or non-Jews. I'll go back to it later on. But almost every play that I've watched so far contained a comical interlude, which was at best very loosely connected to the play's plot. At some occasions, these comical interludes are performed by famous, by prominent Hasidic comedians who are invited to the play specifically for this purpose. So, for example, in Misterye, in the play Misterye, a slapstick shtick is performed by a famous Batchen, Yossele, who's also known by his stage pseudonym as the Pester Rebbe. And here on the photo, you can see him standing in the middle during a rehearsal to the Misterye play. So at this point, I want to show you a 3 or 4 minutes video from Wie is Yossele, or Where is Yossele, a 2009 play that retells the story of the so-called Yossele-Schumacher affair. To make the long story short and to give you a bit of a background. So in the 1960s, a group of Haredi activists hid and smuggled out of Israel a young boy called Yossele, because they were afraid that his parents, the parents of the boy, may take him away from a Haredi framework and send him to a secular school and basically raise him up as secular Israeli. The police and secret services got very quickly involved in the search for the boy, but to no avail. Very soon it became clear to everyone that the police and the Mossad basically have no clue how to operate unnoticed in Hasidic neighborhoods. So when suddenly it was easier for the Mossad agents to blend in Syria or in Egypt or in Argentina than in Mea Shearim. And for the state apparatus, it was an utter failure. But for the Haredim, it became a symbol of the strength that comes from unity and that comes from sticking to orthodox customs and language and sticking to Yiddish. And the scene you're about to see is a series of slapstick sketches in which 2 clumsy policemen attempt to infiltrate Mea Shearim. They try to dress up in Hasidic garb, which comes, as you'll see, comes across like absurdly comical, with the fake side locks and Hasidic frocks put on backwards. And finally, they set up a stand because they want to impersonate Hasidic vendors, but obviously it ends up very badly. It ends up with a kerfuffle because they do that on Shabbos. So all in all, everything gives them away. Their gross incompetence, the lack of knowledge of Haredi customs and language, because the play wants to make it clear to its audience. It's true that only a small group of initiates orchestrated this whole Yossele Schumacher affair, but it was possible thanks to the united community that stood behind them. So let's watch together this short scene from the play.
Geistig verstellen Haredi Shiit in nog dem. Was gast het in?
Ich meine, der Beste ist noch, in so man sich wegstellen, der Russen für seine zentrale Besmeidrisch.
Sintig, Montag, Dienstag, wann die beste Zeit?
Ich meine Shabbos.
Shabbos?
Hand Shabbos, ja.
Hand?
Ja. Die Menschen gehen nach Hause bald von Besmeidrisch. In mit sicher kennen absolut zwischen jetzt haben sich herausstellen draußen Besmeidrisch, verkaufen Schmonskes mit Sachen, in Azoi, mit sie wischen, mit sie fragen Sachen, mit der Rosbekimme Yossele. Die gangen.
Ich muss machen schnell.
Okay. So. Man muss sich schnell umziehen. Ich weiß pinklich, was er sagen umgezogen. Oh, du pinkliche, alle Kleider, was er gehen. Okay, los, zieh doch aus, dann. Behalte eine Kleider. Okay. Mein, deze gangen sei. Okay.
Kijk als geht.
Kijk.
Lach schon wieder.
Lach schon wieder. Der Mann, der was. Ich meine, deze gangen sei, deze zeggen, Pius. Wie sagst du dem? Wie sag ich krass?
Kenn ich eins.
Oh, danke, man darf ich beide, man darf ich zwei, danke. Okay.
Der Dreien ist gewöhnlich, nein?
Meine so.
Der Dreien ist der ganze Tag.
Okay. Okay, deze meiner gangen ze auch.
Wie ist das?
Okay. Oh. Ich weiß, deze gangen sei. Ich weiß, deze ist gesagt ein.
Wie kann ich Schabes mit dem?
Ja, mach mir ziehen den Berg. Ich meine, weißt
Ich weiß jetzt, dass ich Eibig.
ich weiß, es sind nur extra Menschen, meine ich, was mehr ist für den. So. Ah! Achtung. Diese gangen sind nicht jede Woche. Okay. Jui. Siehst du, sie echte Haredi? Ja.
Lachen schon mehr.
Nein, ich lache schon nicht. Okay. Oh. Meine Iden gehen jetzt Sorge von das Medisch. Ich kann mir verkaufen, du Sachen. Extra Zeit für den. Oh, sag, heim kommen. Kauft's! Frische Sachen, aber ich sag.
Schabes.
Gute Sachen, verkaufen, du.
Schabes.
Billige Preisen.
Schabes.
Kauft's. David. No.
Schabes.
Ist der Porsche?
Pasche.
Schabes König!
Schabes König.
Ja, für Schabes, das ist für Schabes.
Schabes.
Special für Schabes.
Und Schabes König ist Skotzin!
Skotzem.
Skotze, heimische Skotze, heimische...
Janki! Janki ist Treue! Kima Rebe!
Frische Skotze.
Janki!
Kauft.
Janki!
Wo schreit er?
Wo steht
Meine geht bringen noch Menschen zu kaufen.
Oh,
Ja.
Ich will nicht gucken!
Schabes.
Er hat doch één peer. Eén peer had
Vreemde
hij.
weg een paar, je moet niet gucken betekent. De vreemde weg een paar shit.
Oei, wee. Weg een paasje hier, hoor.
Pasche. Ja,
Pasche.
frische Pasche.
Oei, wee.
Maar dat is de gaming design.
Dat is
Frische
onze
paasje.
Dat is
sorry.
de gaming design. Die gemeente
Nee,
design.
zeer billig.
Om de hoofd laat me door.
Zoek nog.
Maar dat is mooi gezegd. Maar dat doet dat mag naar me gewoon jetzt. Aber schön.
Zoek nog. Je weet, Shabbos met Tony
Shabbos.
Geweld, met Tony. Linker op. Moekse.
Shabbos König.
Lustig.
Hij is weg van ons. Hij is weg van ons. Wie is hij? Läuft het nog?
Right. So those of you who have ever visited Jerusalem may be a bit surprised watching this scene and seeing this spacious square with a well and the tree in the middle and the forest and the river in the background. But this is Mea Shearim. So while it may seem ludicrous, but in this case, the scenography plays an important role as well. It's supposed to convey the idea of a Haredi neighborhood as a warm and Hamish and homey environment that carries on the spirit of the pre-war Hasidic community. That's one example. Later, I mentioned already the increasing professionalization of the Hasidic pleyz, which I believe is at least was partially made possible thanks to the influx of money from the distribution of the DVDs and the streaming services. And this professionalization can be visible on several levels. So first of all, the most daring companies stage their plays stage their plays in huge venues rented outside the community. like, for example, the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, which is a venue with a capacity of over 3,000 people. The troops actually compete with introducing invention and improvements to every new show in order to attract the audience and to fill these enormous halls. And just to give you a feel of the development of the shpiln within a few years only, and to show you a bit the differences between those more of an old school type of plays and the edgiest shows today. So if you look, for example, at Zuzia Schmelzer's 2014 In Frosten beim Deutsch, you'll see that scenography, costumes, and props are barely symbolic. Cars are made of plywood. The port and the sea that you can see in this particular scene is just a background painting of dubious quality and a few folding chairs. A thing that we shall go back to later on is the issue of costumes. Here, the costumes serve a fairly preposterous plot and a comical relief. So very shortly, in this part of the play, the protagonist runs away from the Nazis and hides in the woods, dressed as a bear. And when he reaches the seaside, he bumps into another bear, and he's terrified. He thinks that that this is it, that he's in grave danger, until he realizes that the other bear is actually another survivor in disguise. But like, leaving this strange plot and the bears aside, what I want to show you here is the comparison between the scene in the port in this play and the representation of similar settings in 2016 play Intern Rikn. Intern Rikn was produced by one of perhaps two most innovative troupes, in this case by the Neuhaus production, also known as the Intern Havraya. And here we can see a lot of effort, a lot of money invested in this scene, not only in the background, but also in the model of a British ship and in many other props. And no folded chairs, no simple decorations, but a lot of work invested in using this stage to its full extent, to its full potential, and coming up with a stunt or a prop that would outdo the competition. So Intern Rikn tries to enchant the audience with the 18th century British ship. In Misterye, the trick does, among other things, the stage set as a cutaway model of a house, which allows the spectators to follow both the life of a Jewish family downstairs and various ploys undertaken by two Mancunian businessmen in the upstairs office. The 2018 Sabotazh tries to do even more to outdo the competition. So you can see there a Russian train rolling through the stage and a car of the New York subway in the final scene. But most of all, perhaps the most interesting thing, the most innovative prop used in this play is something that definitely shall go in the history of the Hasidic Yiddish theater as the Hasidic Miss Saigon moment, when an aeroplane lands on the stage. Same goes, so that's the scenography, but same goes for special effects and various stunts that are introduced to make the plays more attractive for the audience. Sabotazh, this particular play is a drama revolving around a Jewish engineer who tries to leave the Soviet Union in order to reconnect with his sons in the United States. And in order to paint a bit more colorful image of the Russian culture, the producers had a Cossack dance troupe to perform in one of the scenes. In Intern Rikn, which takes place during the American War of Independence, we have a scene where American soldiers attacked the British military by coming down the stage on a rope. In another scene of this play, we have a house blown up on stage. Costumes are also often very lavish or exaggerated, which on the one hand serves the clear identification of the positive and the negative characters in the story, but on the other hand, they help achieve a comical effect. So here on the left-hand side photo, you can see the main villain of the Yossele play, that is the chief of the Mossad, Iser Harel. And on the right-hand side photo, you can see the main protagonist of the Misterye shpiln, 5-0, who is about to be roughed up by 2 Italian mobsters. So as you can see, positive characters usually dress identifiably as Orthodox Jews, sometimes wearing a long fake beards as an obvious symbol of their piety. And conversely, the villains wear secular clothes and have either short or taped up beards and uncovered fake bald heads. They usually bear Gentile or Israeli names. They usually weave in words in English, in Russian, or in Israeli Hebrew. And by and large, they project violence, ignorance, or at best, plain silliness. However, just like any other element of the shpiln, also costumes have become increasingly elaborate, and professional makeup substituted taping up actors' beards with a masking tape. Since the plays do not exist on stage only, but are later sold on DVDs and in streaming services, the producers go to great lengths to make them worth the buck. The 3 or 4 hours plays are supplemented with interviews with the artists and with the making of. And moreover, in the video versions of the plays, the scenes are connected together with graphics and short videos. In some cases, these graphic and video additions may by far surpass the quality of the stage in itself. Take, for example, the Eyrope brent, the Europe in Flames, the Europe Burns, from 2018. And that's a play that may be of particular interest to many of you because it was staged in London and it partially takes place in the Holocaust exhibition of the Imperial War Museum. In terms of the quality of production, Eyrope brent is much closer to the cheaper shpiln by Zuzia Schmelzer than to the Intern Extravaganza. But what's interesting is that Eyrope brent opens with a surprisingly well-executed animated introduction that I'm going to show you right now.
Eyrope brent, a Geschichte gebaut, das tinkelste Zeit in einem langen jiddischen Historie. A Nacht von Pan in Achsurius, was hat sich gezeugen 6 Jahre lang. Eyrope, was ist amul gewesen, das Zente von dem jiddischen Leben, mit Länder, steht in Defelig, mit hinderte Gehilles und Hasidism, in tausende Bute Medruschen, Yeshivas und Kollelen, Talmud Teures in Meidelschules. Millionen jiddische Neshomes, Tates und Mammes, Reides und Babes, und kleine Kinder, was das Deutsch Gemachschemon, haben mit der Systematischkeit gepanikt, mit der Nachsurius, was die Welt hat keinmal nicht gesehen, in Arbeit, Konzentrationslagern wie Auschwitz, Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen, Sobibor und zähnliche andere gebaut geworden für ein Ziel. Sie brutalisch panigen in Schächten 11.000 Kedoshim jedes Tag. Eyrope am Azeive durchgenetzt mit jiddische Blit.
So what you could see is an example of a fairly impressive DVD addition to the play. Other shpiln have usually somewhat less impressive graphics or video reels. And here, on a bit more personal note, I must say that for some reason, some of the producers of the shpiln have some strange penchant for Polish graphics. And for example, in the Misterye shpil, Manchester is introduced with a reel showing streets of the 1980s Warsaw. And for example, Intern Rikn, this 18th century American port is clearly played by the old port of Gdańsk or Danzig, but no idea why. But the increasingly, and also like the increasing sophistication of these shpiln has one more somewhat funny consequence for the on-stage performance that I wanted to mention. As the production on the plays has become increasingly more expensive, the producers became more and more dependent on the sponsors. And so advertisements and product placements are omnipresent, both in the scenography and in the dialogues. And you definitely shouldn't be surprised if you watch, that's a real example, a play about, for example, the Soviet Gulag or the 1970s in the Soviet Union, and you can hear two characters on the stage recommending a grocery supermarket in upstate New York or a pediatric clinic somewhere in Brooklyn. But so far, that's what you can see on the stage. I should definitely mention what you cannot see. Due to the, as I said a bit earlier, due to the Hasidic or Haredi generally laws of modesty, women do not perform on stage with or for men. And this limitation forces the producers to look for creative ways of explaining, for example, the absence of a mother in a onstage depiction of a model Hasidic family. So sometimes they choose to kill the mother off and add a line in a dialogue that explains that the main protagonist is a widower. But sometimes this gets slightly more complicated. So I mentioned to you the play Yossele, about Yossele Schumacher and his kidnapping or his smuggling him away to the States. And this play is an interesting case of this Hasidic Yiddish theatrical plays based on a true story. The problem is that in this true story, it was a woman who smuggled Yossele outside of Israel, first to Europe and then to United States. To add insult to injury, this woman, Ruth Ben David, was a convert to Orthodox Judaism. So in the play, she is replaced by a man, by a Haredi fixer called Moshe Yurevich. And this Moshe Yurevich is the person on the right-hand side of the photo. This Moshe Yurevich is not a woman, obviously. She's also not a convert. So, just to say or just to show that the community does not need an outsider to protect their own, does not need to rely on the outside help to protect their own. And effectively, this Yurevich character recreates Ben David's story, but as a man and presumably a Jew from birth, he's not challenging the boundaries set by the Haredi communities. Sorry. On the whole, however, the relation of the shpiln to the other is rather complex. So I guess one could assume that the Hasidim, who generally separate themselves from the general society, would portray secular Jews and non-Jews as a threatening other. And indeed, there are examples of such portrayal. For example, in Yossele, the main bad guys are the secular Israelis and the Zionist government or the Zionist apparatus in Israel, who basically in this play try to tear away Yossele from religion. Similarly, in a way, the depiction of Native Americans in Intern Rikn is, you can agree, is plainly racist. In Intern Rikn, Native Americans are presented as these strange people who run around the stage and squeak in gibberish when they sort of talk to each other, right? Or you can take as another example in the Frosten beim Deutschen, that shows that that chesed lo chatas, that even the kindness of the nations of the Gentiles are a sin. And in this case, in this play shows a Christian who hides his Jewish neighbor's son during the Holocaust. But then we learn that he does it only for his own benefit. Basically, he doesn't have children and he wants to keep the boy for himself. On the other hand, however, other plays complicate this simple dichotomy between us, the good ones, and them, the evil ones. In Eyrope Brent, for example, a non-Jewish college student prompts an older Hasid, happened upon at the Royal Imperial Museum in London, to recount his experiences during the Holocaust. These students' questions are insensitive, and sometimes they are downright stupid, but thanks to him, Zelig, the Holocaust survivor, gives his testimony in the Wiesenthal Center, which later leads to the capture of his Nazi persecutors. In fintstere nakht in Varshe, we've got a Polish szmalcownik called Tworek, and this Tworek informs on his neighbors on his Jewish neighbors in order to steal their possessions. But his son abandons his evil father, puts a yellow patch on his sleeve, and together with Warsaw Jews, he goes to a deportation to Auschwitz because he doesn't want to be separated from his Jewish friends. But still, there's one particular nation that occupies a very special place in the world of Hasidic shpiln, and that is the Americans. And I will let Avremel from Intern Rikn to explain why.
Oh, Avremel, was machst du?
Wojciech, wat is het?
Seht ihr das als ein Spieler sagt?
Ja, ja.
Nee, ich habe es ans machen, also ich habe es stickele.
Ja, man soll mir interessiert sein.
Komm mal her, verzeihen.
Weißt du, Wojciech, ich hatte schon lange gewollt fragen.
Oh.
Hey, sich zieh, wo suchst du? Auf dem neuen Land du ausgetroffen. Wie zufrieden sind wir jeden. Wir kennen dienen de Varshe für offen. In der Heim dort, in jede Wohnort. Wie jeden Sennen hat kann man nicht. Mit ins Jugend, in Fahrtlugen. Mit Begrommen, mit Azar, Ziche. Schön am Miede, unsere Brüder. Als vertrieben, gepanikt, in erschöpft. Aber in se Gott, Rachmunes hat. An neue Lande, du farin, sehr gern. Du lässt mein Leben, du kennt ihr Weben. Welche Religie, was in wie ihr wilt.
Oh ja.
Es macht kein Chilik, ihr seid freiwillig. Ich mein, als ihr hat schon in a Rose Amerika, die hast offene Tieren. Amerika, me kennen sich Jiddisch führen. Amerika, tut it nicht existieren. Kann Geseires in Farbe. distance, oh, verrechten Amerika. Es lohnt sich die Gefechten Amerika, die Gästins Lache rechten. Sie dienen dem einzigen Gott. Was sagst du?
So here you could hear a tribute to the United States. America, you have open doors. America, one can live here in the Jewish way. America, there are no evil decrees and prohibitions here. So America here is really a Malchus Shel Chesed, the kingdom of grace, a prosperous and accepting country in which Jews can finally live freely according to the laws of the Torah. And in fact, Intern Rikn shows how deeply the identity of contemporary American Hasidim is intertwined with American culture and American national myths. Just think about it. 40 years ago, the Hasidic bard Yontev Erlech recorded a whole album called Americhka, or A Little America. And in this album, he scorned American culture, its permissivism and its hedonism. And today, we've got the Intern Rikn that praises the country in which, as you could hear in Avrei Mul's song, everyone can hold on to their faith, whatever it may be. And Intern Rikn does this tribute by putting together a lavish show, at the end of which the whole ensemble comes together to sing the Star-Spangled Banner, Verteidigt und verbessert auf Yiddish. And that'll be the last excerpt that I want to show you. Right, so this interesting surge in patriotic feelings may have been to some degree related to the Haredi community's stand towards the Republican Party and Donald Trump. In a witty dialogue in this play, which was, So in a dialogue at the end of this play that was staged in 2016, we have a situation when the British are about to leave the United States on the ship that you've just seen. And the main villain, dressed here in the red uniform of the British military, turns to George Washington, the person on the right-hand side of the photo, and says to him, "Mr. Washington, you may as well become the first American president with your beautiful white wig, but the day will come when the red will become the president of the United States." "Who, you?" asks Washington, referring to his red uniform. "No, Trump," shouts the British soldier, and the actors come together to bid farewell to the audience. So I wanted to show you today a few plays, a few Hasidic Yiddish plays from the recent decade. And while most of these plays take place in the past, in the recent past, or or even in the ancient times, they actually speak to the contemporary Hasidic youth in their language, in Hamish Yiddish, in order to teach them appropriate behavior and values according to the norms of the Hasidic communities today. The heroes from the past serve as role models for the youth in the audience, showing them the power of Torah study, love of a fellow Jew, honoring one's parents, and humility and readiness for self-sacrifice for the cause. A Chabad Chassid in Sabotazh sums it pretty well when he says that one must live according to the Jewish alphabet. Aleph stands for emunah, or faith. Beis stands for bitochen, or trust in God. And Gimel stands for geule, or the trust in the salvation. This alphabet, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, emunah, bitochen, geule, is an invention of a real Chabadnik, of Sholem Rubashkin, sentenced to many years in prison for various economic crimes and released in 2017 by Donald Trump. Times change, admit the authors of the shpiln, but the straight and righteous path remain the same. And perhaps you can say that it's a bit anachronistic. But you know, en mukdam u'moichor b'Torah. There's no earlier or later in the eternal Torah. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Wojciech, for a really, really fascinating, thought-provoking and riveting lecture with amazing clips. So we have some questions. Karen, are you there? Would you like to unmute yourself? You had a few questions. I don't know if you'd like to ask them all at once. Are you there?
Yeah. I guess, you know, let me just ask one. I mean, these are just, you know, fascinating presentation. Just thank you so much. This was so interesting and really just well done and thought-provoking. I'm wondering if the presenter has actually seen any of these productions live, or is working pretty much off of recorded live productions, because this is you know, in professional theater studies right now, there's a lot of discussion about looking at virtual, because we can't go to live theater. So I'm just wondering if he's seen any of these live, and if they're, you know, if he has any comments about the difference between the live and the recorded ones. Thank you.
Shall I answer right now, or yeah, that's the okay. Thank you for that question. I have to admit that unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, I haven't seen any of those plays live. I would really love to one day, but due to many mostly geographic limitations, I had to rely on the DVD versions and the streaming services. So unfortunately, I cannot say much about the differences between the live staging and the DVD production. Or, for example, I can't really tell much to I can't really add much to the discussion of the audience, for example, or
yeah,
the
reception is
right, yeah, the reception. But also, as far as I know, again, mostly from reading around these plays, many of these productions also include a lot of props that the audience receives. That also serves to, you know, to make these stagings, to make these performances much more attractive. And so I think in Misterye, but I might be mistaken right now, all the people would receive like a program, but printed in a printed as an old newspaper, for example, or something like that, or they would get like a lot of stuff
promoting interactivity.
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, again, like to sum up, I really can't talk much about that. and I rely only on the recordings.
Would you be able to go in there as a secular person? Would you even be able to go in as an audience member?
Good question. I think yes. At least I visited places where I visited like online sites where you could buy these tickets to some of these shows. I didn't go through because like I didn't have an opportunity to go actually to the show, and these shows are quite expensive as well. So as far as I know, yes. I don't think that would be a problem, but perhaps like I know after a short conversation with Lily's team that many of the members of Lily's team have much more intimate knowledge of this scene, so perhaps they could say more about that.
Wojciech, I think you might look like one of these Mossad agents trying to blend in if you try going.
Laser, you've been to some of these, right? Did you want to say anything about them?
Oh yeah, I guess it's sort of like, I don't know, I don't want to call it folk theater, but it's very, very popular, and it's not the Broadway or London theater scene. It's very, very long, and there are long breaks, and the technical, some things don't work sometimes, and it begins an hour late, and they bus people in from all over the place. So it's a very sort of informal and rough going, at least in my experience.
Did anyone else want to add anything who's been to one of these productions live?
I have, to at least the female equivalent of them. The audience in comparison to typical mainstream theatre is certainly much louder than what you would expect the etiquette to be in typical theatre. So people participate, they cheer, they boo, and they react vocally, and it's not frowned upon. So there's almost a much stronger repertoire and relationship between the actors on stage and those watching. It almost becomes a theatre participating in the show through their vocal reactions. Yes.
Thanks, Shifi.
I was also producing some of the shows in Israel behind the scene. I can say that we try to avoid mistakes like technical, but a lot of times it's like lack of equipment or lack of money or lack of skills. This is the problem because it's not professional. I can also say that the audience do participate also in the boys shows. They're booing and yeah, if a character that everyone knows comes in on stage, so everyone is like, ooh, and like, yeah.
I mean, at least some of these you can hear on the recordings. So, but again, it's only a reminiscence of what you can actually experience when you're there, I imagine. But generally most of these plays, they are recorded with live audience, so you can hear the reactions sometimes. I know that at least, like, again, when I was reading around the stage, these plays, I think the group that puts together the Unglaublich series, they also advertise the productions by saying that they have like the proper mashgichim in the audience that that control that everything is in order. So that would be also interesting to know more about the strategies of hashgacha, of control or supervision of the audience, and what's accepted, what's not accepted, what is the behavior that's crossing the line. But again, unfortunately, I can't say anything about it.
I wanted to add one more thing, actually, too. In Israel, it's sometimes the same plays running twice or three times, and each time in a different city. So actually, you can see some of the versions, but the DVD shows is only a version from one of them, or if there is mistakes, so it's a combined from some plays together, from some versions. and I can say also, you mentioned earlier that there is not a lot of critique on the community, but so usually in Purim Spiel, there is more critique, and probably it's inside critique about like famous figures inside the community, or like small little politic from inside the communities, but not big critique, or not critique on the way, of course not. On the, you know, on the derech, you will not find any critique.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I was really interested in. And again, when I sort of like try to compare it to what I try to hear in some of the songs or to see in some of the films, these are not very, like, these are not things that are huge, I would say. Like perhaps some other, like, I don't know, like, I think most of people would probably just ignore them, because I'm thinking, for example, about one of the Lipa Schmelzer songs when he like complains on Maya Gidu Ashkenim, like about the public, like the opinion of the neighbors, and like the thing that within the close-knit community, you're always sort of supervised by your neighbors, and the difficulty of living in such an environment. But it's not very, you know, it's not something, it's not a rebellion against this order. Or the film that I was thinking about was the film for women called Sgurim, where I think the thing that the sort of the establishment, whatever it is, didn't like was that one of the very inspirational characters in the film is I think he's a convert or Balat Tshuva, or a newly religious girl, and the film shows the apprehensive way she's treated by the frum from birth, right? By the born religious, the people who are born in the community. And so, as far as I understand, because of that, some of the people sort of banned the film, and the producers lost like tons of money. So, so again, it's somewhat subtle. Like it's not a all-out critique of the derech again, but I haven't seen so far in the shpiln something like that. But again, perhaps because there's too much at stake here.
Great. Thanks, Wojciech. Asya, are you still here? She said that
yes.
You have to leave early. Okay, great. So would you like to ask your questions?
Sure. Thank you so much for this presentation. I had two questions. One is, I was very interested by the highly produced video that you showed us that played on the DVD before the actual play. And I was wondering if you've been able to discover whether those, you know, if that happens in more than one DVD, whether those are original animations or they are borrowed from other sources. And my other question, there's been a bit of a discussion in the chat about women's and men's performances, and in the girls' plays that I've observed, women very often play men by making costumes that are meant to resemble men's clothing. And from what you said, it sounds like that's not done commonly in men's productions. And I think Laser had a comment as well that he's seen it very briefly, but not in extended roles. So I was just wondering if you had any more to say about that.
Sure. About the first one, about the animation, the animated video, I haven't been able to trace the source, unfortunately. I can't remember any mention of the source on the DVD itself, and like I didn't find it in any other place. In a few other DVDs that I watched, like including the Warsaw reel. I mean, it just seems that it was just, you know, acquired somewhere from, looked like a cinema chronicle or whatever you call it, that was acquired this or another way. But the example from Eyrope brent is really at least for me, it was really an unusual one. And again, like, it's a great question, but I really don't know whether they commissioned it or they just got it from somewhere. Regarding women on stage, or like men impersonating women, I haven't seen that. Again, one of the things is that there will be a lot of I don't know, unfortunately, yeah, which is mostly because I won't really pretend that I've done a very thorough research on the history of the pleyz. But in and there's limited amount of plays that I've watched. I think I've seen one scene where a female character was acknowledged on the scene in a way that, and that's the Yossele. That's what comes to my mind right now. But she's never seen, or there's no actor who actually plays Yossele's mother. It's the Yossele, the actor who plays Yossele, who screams, "Oh, mom!" and then he runs, he runs off the stage. I've seen men dressed as women playing in Hasidic videos. There's a great DVD done by Michael Schnitzler with I think 7 or 8 Hasidic stories, like songs made of Hasidic stories, each of them 7 or 8 minutes. And in one of there's one where you've got a scene in which you can see a woman's hands, so it's like a first-person perspective, and you can see her hands. And there's another one where you have a guy dressed in tons of clothes that's supposed to be female clothes. But I think that's all. All the other plays I can think about right now. Sometimes mentioned women, but in a way when they had to explain why there is no women on stage, even though everyone would expect them to participate.
But I think it's also fair to say that even in women's plays, there aren't male characters aren't very central. You do see women dressing up as men, but it's not oh, dad, come on in after work, and it's not. They don't have equal screen time.
Actually, I mean, I did watch a school production in which was based entirely around a story of 2 boys and their grandfather, and the 2 boys, Frank and John, were the main characters played by girls. So I think it varies.
I'll add to that the representation of men in girls' shows is definitely more prevalent in high school or seminary productions, but is certainly rarer in film productions. And film productions, they'll be presented quite equally as in the men. So that you'll hear a male voice behind the scene, you'll see a male's hand, but you very rarely see a male character, whereas on stage shows, you do tend to see them quite prominently, almost equally to the female characters.
So we have a question from Victoria Lisek. Victoria, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very interesting research. I was wondering, how have the plays been accepted by different Hasidic groups, and what the receptiveness has been, if there's been any backlash? And also, is there a tendency for certain Hasidic groups or dynasties to be more involved in the production of the plays, or does it tend to be sort of a collaboration between several of the groups?
Thanks. I try to figure out which groups these producers of these plays belong to, or which groups at least some of the actors belong to. And I think I found a few Satmarers, which is not surprising given that the 2 Satmar communities are the biggest ones. And Zusha Schmelzer, as far as I know, is a Skwerer. I don't know much about the reception or about any backlash on the part of any of those communities. I think part of the strategy of the artists is to sell them as pan-Hasidic plays. And so I think first of all, some of those plays don't talk about Hasidim, right? I mean, there are Talmudic sages sometimes, or Jews in Spain or whatnot. But in most cases, in most cases of plays that talk about Hasidic groups in the 20th century, the differences are downplayed, I would say. It's not that important. And so sometimes names of certain tzaddikim would be mentioned, or sometimes different tzaddikim, like their voice would be played, like parts of the ceremonies or whatnot. Sometimes that happens. But I think generally the idea is to present something as generally like as pan-Hasidic or generally Haredi more than specifically Hasidic. That's at least my experience with these plays. Sabotazh is interesting, I think, because this is a play where you can see a distinguishedly Chabad Hasid on stage. You can get you see by the fedora and by the way he carries himself that this person is a Chabad Hasid. And here it is interesting. I mean, first of all, we can perhaps talk a bit more and again, like there are people here who know much more about that, about the sort of the position of Chabad within the Haredi community today, or within the Hasidic community today, and the way they are perceived by other non-Chabad Hasidic groups. But here it's interesting because it talks about Jews in the Soviet Union and the help of American Hasidic Jews for Jews left behind in the Soviet Union, and for the plight to leave to move to the United States. And so that's an interesting example of how sort of the internal Chabad history, which sees itself as the whatever we call it, as the defender of Soviet Jewry, is accepted by non-Chabad producers, basically. But other than that, I don't know. Like again, Yossele is I think is an interesting example because in the real story we've got. Like in fact, in the history of Yossele, were involved, among others, like Wrocław Hasidim and Chabad Hasidim. Chabad Hasidim played an important role. Like his grandfather was a Wrocław Hasid, his uncle was a Chabad Hasid, so they did play an important role. In the play you won't see that. Like you can guess perhaps that the grandfather is a Breslev, or at least he's a Yerushalmi or whatnot, but it's not important. It's the community with the capital C that's important rather than internal divisions. Yeah, the unity, the Achdes, I think, is one of the main topics of those plays. But again, I will be happy to be corrected by people more involved in producing this plays, for example.
I can talk a bit about the backlash. There is backlash to these plays. There definitely was in earlier years, and there still is to some extent. I remember when these plays first came to London. The Hasidic community in London is roughly a decade or so behind the Hasidic community in New York, pretty much all things. And there was massive backlash. I remember the show was advertised before Pesach for Chol HaMoed. All kids got really excited, and it was cancelled really the very last minute with great loss. And sometimes the rabbis will say it's okay, but with certain conditions. I think I remember once the condition was that no actors, it has to be visible on all the actors that are wearing kippahs, couples underneath their costumes, and stuff like that. And to this day, I know there are many families who would not let their kids go and see shows like that because it's a waste of time that can be used for learning, or it takes away the head from learning and stuff like that.
So we have a question from Izzy. Did you want to ask? You had a couple of questions. Do you want to ask those?
Yeah, sure. So the first question I asked is, so I think, you talk about the rise of Yiddish theater and this phenomenon of, professional groups putting on shows, men putting on shows is indeed quite new. But you haven't spoken about, well, we've mentioned the women shows, but these shows are much older, aren't they? They go for decades. Women have been putting on shows. Maybe if you could talk a bit about why you think maybe the rise of the male theatre is maybe more important or maybe more professionalized. And my second question, or if not, why you focused on the male theatre? Maybe because it was more accessible, you couldn't get access to female shows which aren't put online, obviously. So maybe you can talk a bit about the difference. The second question was about whether there's any kind of comparable phenomenon in non-Hasidic Haredi communities. So whether you'll see anything like this in the Litvish community. My suspicion is the answer is no, but I wonder if you have any more thoughts on that.
Right. I mean, the first question, yeah, definitely the male shows are much more accessible, and they are distributed on DVDs that are easy to get, or you can find them online. Probably, yeah. I won't have a much better answer. It might also have to do with the language itself. Like, I've seen more films like for women, but in English or in Hebrew, whereas and more staged and recorded plays in Yiddish for men. And yeah, again, like people who work on the use of languages and code switching between men and women in Hasidic communities perhaps could tell a bit more about that. I think that could be related to it. I know that with the, maybe not with this plays, but with the films, right? At least to some extent, the channels of distributions are different for female films and male films. So the male films go like straight to DVD, basically, and female films are mostly, as far as I understand, showed on in rented halls, which again, like they may be much more popular. They might be maybe much more of them, but you have to have there are different ways of accessing them, which again, I guess is predominantly related to the idea of tzniut, of modesty, that concerns women mostly, and their way of showing women or women appearing on stage and so on. But again, like I'm very much aware that I'm just walking around your question, answering that.
No, I wonder if I wonder if there is a cultural significance to the rise of male theatre specifically, because I think in Hasidic educational system, there was always more room for girls and for women for entertainment, right? Girls always had comedy evenings and stuff like that. And so I wonder if there is, in terms of cultural significance of, the new rise of Yiddish theatre, if there is a specific significance to the fact that now kind of male adults, are becoming professional actors and professional producers, which is, quite different from girls putting on a show for their school or something like that. That doesn't become a cultural phenomenon. And also, the difference is when males put on a show, it can be watched as family time. Boys and girls together can watch it, because women are allowed to watch males act, but not vice versa. So there is more cultural significance to these shows.
No, I mean, very possible. Again, like I totally take your argument. I also think that the fact that there's a whole, I don't know, maybe that's a bit too much, but perhaps there's a whole generation of producers who did first these tapes and then produced music and so on. So like there have been a based build upon which this theater, this professional theater, again, like not only more of a intern thingy than Zuzia Schmelzer, on a random stage, whatnot, emerged. But not sure if I can add anything to that. And with the Litvish community and other communities, I think there's more things, not in Yiddish, right? There are in other languages which are more prominent in those communities. I mean, in Chabad as well, right? But that's also related to the Chabad outreach. So I think that would be the equivalent, but I can't really put it in like numbers or in measurable categories.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for a really lively discussion. And this is, I think, a topic that we could continue on for a lot longer. And we are planning to have a kind of like sort of mini conference event, including like speakers from the various talks at some point soon. So we'll let you know about that, because there will probably be more chance to revisit this topic. But in the meantime, we're kind of coming to the end of the session. So I just wanted to thank Wojciech again for a really fantastic talk. And also mention before we finish that the next talk in the seminar series is going to be on Tuesday, the 2nd of March, and it's going to be given by Chaya Novi of the City University of New York, and the Eventbrite link is up. So I'm just going to put that in the chat in case anybody would like to register for that now, but we'll send out the advertising by the usual channels, the IJS, and however you found out about this, you will find out about that. And everything is on the website for our for the seminar series talk as well. So if you Google Eyrope Albert Contemporary Hasidic Yiddish Seminar Series, you'll find all of the upcoming talks there as well on one page. So thank you so much, Wojciech. And
thank you very much. Thanks for for the opportunity to share with you this strange passion of mine, and thanks for all the questions and for all the comments. It's really enlightening.
And it's been great to see you, even if only virtually. That's kind of how we all see everybody nowadays. So
right,
it's pretty normal.
Thanks a lot.
And thanks, Bobo. It's lovely to see you. So if anyone wants to like hang around for a few minutes, then we can, or else we will end the session.